books other than textbooks and reference books of law. Doing general reading is essential to give you a different kind of perspective. I have interviewed candidates for civil services for 14 to 15 years. And in every interview, on one thing on people score more marks than others is if they are able to tell that they have read some recent general book. So invariably people will ask questions about the new books, and the coaching centers, they prepare all kinds of guides, this and that, but they don't encourage people to really do the general reading. And therefore it is only out of their own interest that some people read that they get selected. So I would request you that in a year at least read 10 books. And since many of you may not read in spite of all my emphasis, we said let one of you read one book and we will at least hear that what is there in that book, so that in the eventuality of any question being asked to you in any interview about any current book or a classic book, then you would be able to answer them. I heard that someone is reading Hind Swaraj for a discussion here, even though Gandhi subsequently changed his opinion on many things which he has read Hind Swaraj, but Hind Swaraj is a good book from good old times to read and discuss. Mr. Maheshwari is a senior journalist, in fact one of the first who started using new media. He was the one who guided me and encouraged me in the initial years to write op-eds in the newspapers. He has written a number of books on all kinds of issues. But the book which we are going to discuss today is this book, The Power of the Ballot. And very important at a time when the Union Cabinet has decided one nation, one election thing. There is a chapter 19 in the book. Of course, like an intelligent journalist, he has not committed anything on that, whether we should do it or we should not do it. And that is a job which in a discussion where we want to learn, we will ask him that what is his opinion. The issue of delimitation is very important. We say we want one law, one nation, one law, but why did we create an exception and already did delimitation in Jammu and Kashmir? There is a chapter on this as well. And of course on paid news, on Chief Election Commissioner and Election Commission's independence. I really didn't know, but that is the importance of reading a book. So I thought that the most admirable tenure of a Chief Election Commissioner in India has been of T.N. Session. But it is Sukumar, if I am right, the first Chief Election Commissioner who in a record time was able to conduct an election of this magnitude. You remember that under the Government of India Act 1935, the franchise was extremely limited. Only if you are a property holder or you are literate or you are educated, you had a right to vote. And then our constitution gave right to vote to everyone under universal adult suffrage. So anyone who was 21 became a voter in 1952 elections. And in about 17 months or so, that election was conducted by an election commissioner, and there is a whole chapter. Every single thing I read about Sukumar was a new addition to my knowledge. Very interesting book, written in very simple language. Electoral process is key for the success of democracy. And that is why I have number of times said, prior to Supreme Court deciding the electoral bond case, that there is no case before the Supreme Court which is more important than the electoral bond case. Because the purity of our electoral process is under question. I really don't know from where Supreme Court really mustered that kind of courage, because there have been number of judgments which went in favor of government, so much so that the Supreme Court was said to be an executive court, but an executive court just before elections gave a landmark judgment on electoral bonds, though the problem has not yet been solved. So that's a different part. But if we are interested in democracy, we should be interested in free and fair elections. We just had elections. We are right now having elections. In Jammu and Kashmir, I think they are voting today or tomorrow for the second phase. And then on 5th of October, we are having elections in Haryana. So it's the right time to talk to someone who has written a full book on the power of the ballot. I have requested my colleague Sugandha, who teaches media law paper, to lead this discussion or to introduce some of the themes of the book, and then I will hand over the floor to the author, and then of course you will have questions. Whatever, I leave it to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. It is really
Club convener should sit.
yeah. So it is an opportunity for me to actually go through this book. It's an honor, sir, for being able to go through this book. Although I was reading it at my leisure, but I tried to speed it up, and so I have covered some parts, a large part of the book, and I would want to go through some important things that I really noticed. The first important thing, of course, this is a publication, the publishing house is Libsbury. The Power of the Ballot, the Travail and Triumph in the Elections. This has been published in 2022. You will, if you open, there's a long number of chapters, but they're very short, but very crisp and very engaging, very simple. And they cover a wide range of issues relating to elections. So what I could find out was that there were a lot of statistics, even sociological, even literary aspect to some of the chapters, political perspective, of course, and almost all aspects of elections, coming from use of technology in elections. If we, for example, talk of EVMs, and if we talk about fake news, and how the election dynamics has kind of got affected because of all of this, has been discussed in detail. And it is really, it provokes you to further investigate what else can be done. It leaves us to a point of curiosity as to what next. So that is one of the most important aspects of this book. It beautifully represents the election and all the aspects of election that is associated with it. And it really talks about election as a process which involves, especially conducting the election, which involves a lot of courage, fortitude, and perseverance, according to author's own words. If we go to the first chapter, we find the first introduction is Homo Electionis, that we are extremely democratic, and we really love elections, and we are really passionate about it. We participate at what is called as performative citizenship, where we love to go and vote. And that is also an assertion of our identity as a citizen of the nation. And that is very important, specifically in a society and in a nation where a lot of the population actually feels disconnected with the power. So the expression of that connect is through voting. And it is an expression of one's selfhood, and it's one's autonomy as a citizen, one's ability to make choice. So that expression is very, very precious to Indian citizens. And Sir has very nicely pointed it out in the first chapter, talking about specifically individual dignity and selfhood as power or part of performed citizenship, where he's talking about taking the quote from Mukulika Banerjee's. He is also talking about, in the second chapter, about pandemic. Now this is very important because pandemic had dramatic effect on the elections. Dramatic effect in the sense that if I may have the liberty, I can call pandemic is anti-democratic because it forced people to really stop talking to each other, getting close to each other, which is a very, very critical aspect of a democratic process. So if you look at what Sir has really discussed here, and again in this chapter, therefore, he really talks about very, very critical issues that rose specifically in context of elections in Bengal and in Bihar in 2020, because Bihar election was one of the first elections, Sir, as you pointed out, at the time of COVID, and there were some countries which had cancelled those elections. And here what we see is how Sir has really brought about certain kinds of conflicts, specifically in the whole process. For example, opposition saying, let's have usual campaigning, versus the BJP saying, especially in Bihar, that let's have what is called as virtual campaigning. As I said, one of the most important things that we will notice is the underlying current of technology. And a lot of times what we will notice is that technology is somehow threatening. And we really need to control it. So here you see the virtual campaigning versus usual campaigning, as Sir has discussed this very beautifully, how BJP has insisted on virtual campaigning. Subsequently, of course, usual campaigning is allowed in Bihar. There's a lot of usual campaigning, a lot of crowd, a lot of violation of the COVID norms. And Election Commission of India had to really, think very broad, as Sir has pointed out. It had to, kind of coordinate with with the health department specifically, come out with strictures and norms, and how, for example, even to that little, details, how to, dispose of biomedical waste which has been produced at a time of election. So imagine the kind of responsibility and planning that whole election commission had to do at the time of COVID. And specifically when there was a lot of opposition to the fact that we should be allowed public campaigning, which is, as we discussed, is the heart of democratic process. And it is very interesting, as Sir has pointed out in this particular chapter, how Bihar, in comparison to Bengal, in fact, Bihar had a better turnover than previous election in 2020. It had a better turnover, and you will find that Bengal, by the time the election happened in Bengal, ECI had to respond more stringently for Bengal, because here we had another wave, which was 2021 second wave of COVID, which was extremely deadly, and it had to curtail public gathering to a larger extent in Bengal than in Bihar. Okay, so how does that really affect how the COVID affected elections, plus how the Election Commission of India had to go beyond what it used to generally do in usual elections and take into account the COVID factor and insist. If you remember, Madras High Court actually made an oral comment against, which Sir has also discussed in his book, an oral comment about how Election Commission is killing people because it is continuing with the elections in India at that point of time when we had the second wave. But yeah, then Supreme Court comes over and Supreme Court says that yes, the media has the right to report the oral, the oral states statements of the court also. So that's another case. Sir has also discussed that in that chapter. The third chapter is talking about, this is very critical also, about false news and elections. As I said, again here, fake news and elections, and here technology again comes in. Sir very, very pertinently points out how specifically the digital media has given space to the political parties to probably manipulate people more, the voters more. We have already we discussed in media law, for example, something called propaganda. Leon Chomsky talks about propaganda and how it is used in capitalist countries. But here what we also see is not only propaganda, going beyond that and micro-targeting the voters, and really planning and targeting them through through social media and digital platforms, etc. So how do we really figure out fake news? And Election Commission of India had really talked about and has insisted to deal with it, as Sir has pointed out in his book, has told about fact-checking units. We have heard of the recent case from Bombay High Court, where the court has struck down the Intermediary Rules 2021, where there's a fact-checking unit which the rule allows the central government to do, but there's a limitation to that provision because it only talks about restrictions in context of any statement regarding the central government. Okay, but then it is a fact-checking unit, and if you see this chapter, you'll find one of the most important tools which the Election Commission of India has used to check this particular fake news in elections has essentially been through fact-checking units. So how do we really, balance it out? This is a very important question, sir, in terms of elections and technology. How do we really now, therefore, look into how do we really check this kind of fake news, which dramatically specifically polarizes the voting pattern in India? So this was chapter 3. I'm quickly going. I don't want to take a lot of your time. This very interesting discussion on Sir, as Sir pointed out, on the first elections in India. And it is brilliant, sir, and I'm really grateful to you, sir, because in the first chapter, I may be skipping some chapters, sir, because it's a lot of chapters that is there. If you look at this third chapter, this chapter on general elections, the first election in India, one of the most touching things that I found, one of the most profound things rather I would say, was the fact that this chapter is really talking about what is called as Sukumar Sen, as Sir pointed out, remarkable bureaucrat and visionary, because very interesting gender-based observation he makes. Like at that point of time when the Sir has pointed out very beautifully how when the voters list was being prepared, women would refuse to give their names and they would refer themselves as someone's husband, someone's brother. They would not give their names. And because of that, Sukumar Sen had to take a stringent action, and he actually kind of debarred and a lot of women, like I think 48 lakhs, if I am right, sir, 28 lakhs women, because he wanted women to tell their names. And you can imagine this was a small bureaucratic step, but it was a remarkable step and a remarkable gender empowerment step, if we can talk about that. So it's very remarkable, sir, for bringing this to light. It was extremely, so it also shows to us how passionate bureaucrats and leaders can bring dramatic change merely by implementing laws in a more imaginative way, sometimes strictly, sometimes making it more flexible. So this chapter was, and we would be really honored if Sir could throw more light on this first election that was conducted in India, as VC Sir had also pointed out. Chapter 5 is also talking about rigging of elections. So rigging has been a major problem, and one of the ways in which the court, especially TN Session, as Sir has mentioned, TN Session had a huge role to play in controlling that rigging and booth capturing, which was prevalent a lot in UP and Bihar at that point of time, and which a lot of effort had to be taken because the entire captured and all false voters would vote, and this would be, and specifically on caste line, as Sir has identified here. Then sir is talking about EVMs. Now again, as I said, technology is a very important thing, and this, I tell you, all of you must read this chapter because this is very, very important. Sir has pointed out how this particular EVM has been discontinued in a large number of countries, including big countries like Germany, I guess, which has discontinued with, what is called as EVMs, and many, many countries, Ireland, Netherlands, Germany, Venezuela, they have all discontinued with this particular EVMs, but we have continued with it. We have many logics to the continuation. There has been many challenges to the EVM. Supreme Court, there was a petition against the EVM. Supreme Court rejected. There was a system of VVPAT, which sir has explained in a very simplified way in the book, which you will find kind of important. We would probably ask sir that whether this particular EVM really is worth it, specifically when it has been pointed out that the election should be transparent. So whether EVMs should be transparent or not. For example, if you see at the software and the hardware, sir has explained that in his book, how the interaction of software and hardware should be independent, but whether we, the Election Commission of India, is able to maintain that independence. And sir has specifically pointed out to the fact that the introduction of VVPAT into the EVMs has actually kind of increased that doubt on the EVMs, because it has to then the interaction or human interaction with the EVM increases. Okay, so this kind of, and the most important thing, there has been a body called Constitutional Conduct Group, which sir has mentioned, and sir has very detailed way mentioned about the different opinions, the list of opinions which has been given by this particular group. And specifically sir has pointed out one of the biggest problems by this particular group has been what is called as possibility, or rather impossibility, of end-to-end variability of verifiability of the data of EVMs. Okay, so that is an opaque process, which sir has really brought out in that discussion. So, but the question still remains whether we should continue with EVMs, therefore, or not, or we should really know what is the process, because there have been 2 or 3 cases where there has been some kind of mismatch, as sir has pointed out, between the EVMs and the VVPAT. So whether we do that, that's a question which probably sir would be most able to kind of direct us to. A very interesting chapter which I found even literary to an extent was the chapter on Dharti Pakars. They are people who have consistently lost elections, and they had to kind of lose their deposit money also, but they have consistently fought elections. Many of them have challenged elections of presidents, and specifically of presidents. Some of them have been also, one example, for example, was Bhagwati Prasad Ghorewala, who actually won 80,000 votes in one of the elections in which he stood, because the people in that constituency were not happy with others, and there was some kind of, which sir has explained, and then they have, what I felt reading that chapter was this, that how important these processes are, not only just because we are a democracy, but also how resentments and kind of disappointments can be expressed through electoral processes. Even though Supreme Court has dismissed many of frivolous petitions which has come before it, challenging the election of the president, but then what I found interesting was these processes are used for challenging the process and an expression of resentment. For example, sir has pointed out that there is a middle level officer, a government officer, who is fighting corruption in his department, and who has actually said that he should be taken to mental asylum, and he is one of them who actually fights for elections. So isn't that also a very important tool? So probably we can also discuss that. Sir also talks about LGBTQ plus A community, A plus community, and talks about how they have also kind of been involved in some of the elections. And paid news has been another area where sir has really talked about in details about how paid news is a kind of corruption of the system, and how it has become extremely popular, specifically 2005, 6, 9, Sir has pointed out those period of times it's become extremely prevalent. Press Council of India has come into picture, has kind of issued certain guidelines, but it doesn't have much of power, to really have imposed penal provisions, as Sir has pointed out. So now then the issue is, how do we really control these kind of news, and how does technology really affect and distort paid news? Because now we are not only confined to the print media, but we also have digital media. So how do we really control now the paid news is one issue which we really need to probably discuss with Sir. Another thing which we pointed out was how, for example, should we have compulsory duty to vote? Generally citizen voting is considered as a right. Should it also be considered as a duty? Then misuse of Article 356, specifically when a political party which comes to power through an election process, and the central government is different, doesn't like that particular government. So how does that, especially an unelected chief minister, for example, being appointed? Sir has pointed out, and this is a very short chapter, but a thoughtful one which strikes us to think about it, that is good election, flawed democracy. Subsequently, we have very, very important chapters. For example, he talks about opinion polls, and how opinion polls started, for example, in the United States of America, how it is now in India also, but we have consistently seen that many times opinion polls have gone wrong, and sometimes misleading, sometimes even at one point of time even influencing voting patterns. So how do we really therefore look at this whole process of voting polls? And here Sir talks about specifically the role of journalists, and how journalists have really failed to catch hold of the pulse of the society, pulse of the people. And he specifically, Sir, is pointing out to 2017 UP elections and 2020 Bihar elections, where he's talking about how there was a lot of mistake in prediction. People thought Nitish Kumar would lose. In Bengal, in UP, the journalists were unable to notice how BJP silently worked at ground level through distribution of LPG connections, and through giving money for building houses, very silently, unnoticed, not into the media not paying attention to it, and yet we are finding that this is the turning point, and they are going wrong completely in terms of predicting who will come to power. And that has consistently happened across recent times. So how do we really then think about journalism? It is really deeply entrenched. We have talked about media law, ownership of media houses, and how it may really influence what kind of news we are reading. So here also there are very beautiful stories, and are the wrong opinion polls really a failure of the press to play its very, very key democratic role that it needs to play in the society? Is that one very, very important thing that we really need to look into? Subsequently, Sir has talked about a very interesting chapter on astrological predictions and satta betting. Sir has talked about, and then specifically, I'm skipping some of the chapters. He talks about compulsory voting and e-voting. So that, as I pointed out, whether voting should be considered as a right, or should it be considered as a duty? And specifically, there's a petition for example, of voting by NRIs, for example. So those issues Shah has really pointed out in his discussion. Then one nation, one election, which is again chapter 19, as Sir has also pointed out, is a very, very important issue. In current times, we've already heard yesterday that is very much a possibility now. So is it right for us to go for that? And how is it going to influence our democratic process and the nature of society that we are into, in a very diverse kind of society, is again something that probably we would want Sir to just throw some light on. So I think I would just wind up now and give some. Thank you so much, Sir. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Sugandha. You have done a great job. And I'm really happy that you were able to flag the issues and look at these issues. In any civil services, judicial services exam, in any interview, for whatever position, you may have questions on should voting be compulsory, should there be a punishment for not going to vote, should we have one nation, one election, should we remove EVM and go back to ballot. So, sir, straight away, Maheshwari sir, can I, as you react to our questions, since Sugandha started, also referred to opinion polls and how those opinion polls and exit polls at times go wrong. So the most celebrated opinion, election strategist, so to say, Prashant Kishore this time, for instance, had said, going to number of TV channels in some 48 hours or so, that it is all over and it is 400, and if it is less than that, then he will quit politics, which he didn't do, by the way. He is forming a political party. But very interestingly, can you believe it, that I had a telephonic conversation with Maheshwari ji, and he said it is 2:30. And I said, अरे नहीं अनिल भाई, क्या आप कह रहे हैं, अयोध्या का मामला हो चुका है, देश मोदी जी के साथ है. The same thing he has written on the Facebook, I think.
Yeah, I wrote a mail to
Ramchandra Guha, and then Guha wrote an article in which he referred to that mail, which was written sometime in March, where in February, where Maheshwari ji has said that it is 2:30. And then that long article by Ramchandra Guha complimenting him for correctly predicting, because they got 2:40. But I remember, Maheshwari ji, that some time back, I think some years ago, you told me about some election that you were traveling in unreserved compartment in some EMU. And there somebody told you that this is going to be the election, and when you said it to your editor, he did not believe it.
Yeah.
So just tell us how we get it wrong. In reading, there is a whole career now. I know many of my students working for IPAC, many law students are there, and there are people making big money in elections, and they are specialized. I had a conversation with one of my old students from Guwahati, and he told me demography like this. इतने कुर्मी हैं और इतने भूमियार हैं और इतने फला है और ये इधर से उधर हो जाए और उधर से इधर हो जाए, तो this will be the result. So how do they go wrong? And please tell that old story about when your editor did not believe your prediction.
I'm grateful to you friends, young friends, you have come here, and Professor Faizan Mustafa sir, Sugandha ji, and Vishwam sir. First of all, I would like to share with you. Okay, I did this book just to have the analysis of the Bihar elections which were held during the COVID. How this exercise could be taken when the COVID affect us. But later on, I developed it into a full book on the basis of my experience in different states, different places. But there are something we must try to understand what is between the lines. Everyone among you, including Professor Faizan Mustafa, praises Session. Session was a bully, and he was caught only by Lalu Yadav. He postponed election in Bihar several times. Then Lalu Yadav said, look here, constitutionally you can't do it. Then he was subsidized. There are, unless we try to read this thing in the perspective, what is there, what is in the news, what is there on the surface and what is behind the news, between the news. Now I tell you one example which I have mentioned in this book. A student of the Indian history, okay, since you can be know about the 1974 Mrs. Gandhi election, Allahabad High Court is missing. Allahabad High Court is missing. It was a major decision in the country which had implication later. Next time when Mrs. Gandhi fought the election in 1980, again it was challenged. Every time used to be challenged. That time the lawyer on behalf of Mrs. Gandhi submitted only one point and Mrs. Gandhi won. What is that one point? UP High Court, since you are the student of law, I am discussing this law topic with you. UP High Court is an amalgamation of two courts. One was the Awadh Court, looking after the Eastern UP district, and one was the United Provinces. Earlier, the name of the Uttar Pradesh was United Provinces. And when
it was in Agra.
Agra. It was at Agra. When they were amalgamated, then the UP High Court at Allahabad was constituted, but it was mandatory that the Awadh High Court district would come under the bench of Allahabad High Court based at Lucknow. Since Raebareli comes into that area, so Allahabad Court could not entertain that area. First time, even at that time when Mrs. Gandhi lost the election, the lawyer could have brought this point. And Mrs. Gandhi has the best lawyer, Mr. Khare, father of the Chief Justice Khare. And Khare was so disturbed after listening the judgment that at the court he didn't put an application for the stay. And the judge was sitting there for 10 to 50, 20 minutes. He was waiting that he should.
Which is a normal procedure when you
Is a
get a
normal
wrong judgment from High Court. So you will immediately stand up and say that you stay this judgment so that I go to the Supreme Court in appeal. But he was in a big shock and therefore it was not stayed. It was stayed subsequently by Justice Krishna Iyer. But Maheshwari ji, no, he gave the, Krishna Iyer stayed it in the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
but committed a mistake.
Thanks.
And therefore, I am giving you a different story. It is Krishna Iyer who is responsible for the imposition of emergency, which nobody may have even thought of. If you are staying an order, it should be a short order. But Krishna Iyer had a love for writing long orders. And therefore, in that famous case, Bangalore water supply versus A. Rajappa, which is a case about Bangalore water supply. He first talks of Bangalore, it has lakes, it has gardens, which is all irrelevant. So he stated, now Mrs. Gandhi was not a prime minister with a slender majority. She was not uncomfortable and in a tight position like P.V. Narasimha Rao or Dev Gowda or Gujral. He was not like this. He was not like even Modi of today. Or she was not like Modi of today. Now, he said that Mrs. Gandhi will continue as Prime Minister. She can continue to participate in the deliberations in Lok Sabha as a member of Lok Sabha, but she cannot vote. Now that one vote of Mrs. Gandhi was not going to save her government.
Yeah.
Yet because of this, that Mrs. Gandhi cannot vote in Lok Sabha, there was going to be no confidence motion. Had there been a no confidence motion, her party had a comfortable majority. They could have defeated that no confidence motion. But because of this, emergency was imposed. And that is why judges should not write too much. They should write whatever is really necessary. But the point which Maheshwari ji is making, had the argument of the right bench been raised in Rajnarayan versus Indira Nehru Gandhi, that judgment would not have come in the first place. Because the High Court would not have even entertained that petition. That is a point. And that is a point which I can tell you, I have not read in any discussion, in any law book on elections. And that is why the general reading of books is important. Yes. So now answer the question. Why people were not able to read the pulse of the people, as Sugandha would say, this time and earlier times?
The pulse of the people you could know. Unfortunately, though it was not a good, I don't know any vehicle driving. Though it was not a good for a journalist, I had to suffer a lot. I walk, I travel in the public transport, then I listen the people discussing there. I was going from Delhi to Azamgarh, just a diversion. Azamgarh, there is a gentleman, the first IIT from his village, a small hamlet of 10 to 12 houses, IIT Madras. He went to Malaysia, became a very rich man. He opened a school, 20 crore rupees he has spent for intermediate college. Math lab, English lab. From Hyderabad he used to call gymnast to teach the student. Compulsory English speaking. Lot of buses filled. I went to meet him and I stayed there for 4 days in the interior of Azamgarh district. In the train on way, in AC first, nobody talked to each other. In air, nobody talked to each other. But in 2 tier, 3 tier, within
Sleeper class?
sleeper class is the best. Within 1 hour, 2 hours, you people will ask from where you are. कहाँ से हैं आप, क्या करते हैं, कौन है, अरे अपना रिश्तेदार है अपने, उनसे बात करते हुए I got the mood. I sent the message to my friend on phone, Sanjeev Srivastava, BBC. मैंने कहा BJP is going to repeat the magic again. बोले what nonsense you talk, you are a Modi bhakt. Modi bhakt. Here in India we have a very simple way of life. If you agree with my opinion and I say something, if you don't agree, you call me a Muslim League or you call me the Hindu Mastermind. Simple logic, end of that logic. Then
Yeah, this is about 2019 election, no? 2019 की story है ना ये?
ये है हाँ 2019
हाँ.
और then everyone said 65. Why? And then there is combination. Mathematics is not the only thing in the election analysis. Chemistry is also there. The combination of the scheduled caste and the Ahir was impossible. And it proved in that election. That vote could not be transferred. So throughout their life, these scheduled castes have been beaten by the middle class at the instances of the upper class. Upper class themselves didn't beat them. They employed the person from the middle caste, Kurmi, Yadav. They had that aversion against them. It is not practical at all. So one should realize that mathematics is not this one, this percentage. And the case of percentage, I would also come to that. And no election in India, any political party, the best seat which the Congress won, it was in the 1984 after the death of Mrs. Gandhi, the election for 400 seats. But the polling percentage out of the vote polled, can you tell me? It was not 50. It was 49 point something. No election since 1952, the ruling party won on the basis of the 50%. In some countries of the Europe, it is mandatory that you cross the limit of 50%. Otherwise, report again. That he was asking, I gave a example, very simple example. This Indian election, something are unpredictable. Can I give this example in Hindi? लखनऊ में चारबाग स्टेशन, अपोजिट चारबाग स्टेशन इज ए चारबाग बस स्टैंड. Charbagh bus stand, there is a municipal corporation building. On the first floor of that building, the Bharatiya Jansan, the predecessor of the BJP, used to have the office, 2 rooms office. लोग दरी पे बैठे हुए थे. One person went there. एक टिकट हमें भी दीजिए, हमें भी एक टिकट दीजिएगा. इलेक्शन 1967, वो 4-5 लोग थे, उन्होंने एक ने कहा भाई पागल है, रेलवे का टिकट सामने मिलता है, बस का टिकट नीचे मिलता है. उसने बोला नहीं साहब, हमको लोकसभा का टिकट चाहिए. और those days the लोकसभा and the विधानसभा election used to be held together. तो एक ने कहा पूछो तो सही से यार इसे क्यों चाहिए। उसने कहा भी क्यों चाहिए। बोले हमको एक जोशी ने बतलाया कि इस बार अगर तुम लोकसभा का इलेक्शन लड़ोगे तो जीत जाओगे। तो उसमें से उन्होंने पूछा कहाँ से लड़ोगे। बोले सीतापुर से। सीतापुर में जनसंघ के आउट ऑफ 5 असेंबली सेगमेंट 1 लोकसभा सीट इज यूपी। वो इट डिफर्स फ्रॉम स्टेट टू स्टेट। आई थिंक 7 इज हियर, लेकिन 9 इज इन हरियाणा। उन्होंने कहा कि आप जो है उनके सीतापुर में 2-3 कैंडिडेट एमएलए थे, वो कैंडिडेट की तलाश कर रहे थे। वहाँ कांग्रेस का कैंडिडेट एक राजा साहब थे पुराने, वो सिटिंग एमपी थे। उन्होंने वर्मा जी को टिकट दे दिया इस वायदे पे कि हर कैंडिडेट को 5 कैंडिडेट से असेंबली के इनको 25,000 ईच और एक जीप दोगे। और
67 was also.
नहीं, और वर्मा जी से पूछा आप काम क्या करते हैं। अब यहाँ इंग्लिश हिंदी की फर्क आई। वर्मा जी ने कहा हमारी फ्लोर मिल है। फ्लोर मिल आटा चक्की को भी फ्लोर मिल ही कहते हैं। आटा चक्की जो होती है मोहल्लों में, गलियों में, देहात में, उनकी थी आटा चक्की। वर्मा जी पे कहाँ इतने पैसे। उन्होंने जब वर्मा जी से किया, उन्होंने कहा हम पे नहीं है। अब टिकट ले लिया, नॉमिनेशन हो गया, उन्होंने वर्मा जी से जीप छीन ली। वर्मा जी अंडरग्राउंड हो गया। अब उस इलेक्शन में जहाँ वोट मांगे वो ही कहें लोग जनसंघ वाले कि ऊपर की सीट के लिए वर्मा जी को, और दूसरी जगह बिजी हैं। वर्मा जी को वहाँ किसी ने नहीं देखा। और वर्मा जी का और जनसंघ के वर्करों का काम कि वर्मा जी वो इलेक्शन जीत गए। और इससे पहले एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग बात ये कि उस टाइम ये स्पेशल बुलेटिन नहीं आते थे। ऑल इंडिया रेडियो पे न्यूज आती थी 8:15 बजे, 8:15 पे रात को। उसमें आई खबर कि वर्मा जी अपने नियरेस्ट कैंडिडेट के मुकाबले
निकटतम प्रतिद्वंदी से आगे चल रहे हैं।
इतने आगे चल रहे हैं। उन्होंने जाके कहा वर्मा जी को ढूंढो। अब तो कह भी नहीं सकते कहाँ है वर्मा जी। वर्मा जी को बड़ी मुश्किल से ढूंढा। वो लखनऊ शहर में किसी रिश्तेदार के घर पे दबे हुए बैठे थे और उन्होंने आने से मना कर दिया। बोले आप लोग हमें मारेंगे जैसे जब मारा था, जीप आपने छीन ली और हम पे कुछ है नहीं। बोले नहीं, बोले आप जीत रहे हैं। बोले हम जब तक सुन नहीं लेंगे हम नहीं मानेंगे। सुबह को 8:15 बजे ये आ गया कि वो जीत चुके थे जब वर्मा जी बाहर निकल के आए। अब वर्मा जी जो जब बाहर तो आ गया, वर्मा जी को तो पार्लियामेंट में मेंबर हो गए। जनसंघ ना तो उन्हें कुछ पता, ना पॉलिटिक्स पता, नहीं है। आखिरी उस सेशन में, आखिरी साल में वर्मा जी कोई पार्टी का व्हिप आया, मैंडेट था। वर्मा जी एब्सेंट हो गए। उनसे पूछा क्यों एब्सेंट हो गए। बोले आज वैजंती माला का डांस हो रहा था, उसके पास आए थे। इस हिंदुस्तान की पॉलिटिक्स में ऐसे ऐसे भी इंसिडेंट होते हैं। आई मेंशन द नेम इलेक्शन, यू कैन चेक फ्रॉम द गूगल, फ्रॉम द इलेक्शन कमीशन। वर्मा जी कितनी वोट से जीते, क्या हुआ, कैसा हुआ। तो ये जो आप पब्लिक मूड है, यू हैव टू डिसाइफर व्हाट डू यू थिंक। आई मे बी नॉट इन फेवर ऑफ मोदी, बट इफ मोदी इज विनिंग हाउ कैन आई डिनाई।
That's right.
That's why that you have to keep it in mind. और ये सब मुझे कोई वो सेशन से नहीं। He was as principal secretary of the Prime Minister राजीव गांधी. He was a bully and he remained bully. और उसके बाद में वो लोकसभा का, राज्यसभा का दोनों टिकट मांगते रहे, राष्ट्रपति बनने के लिए कोशिश करते रहे। इसलिए जो पहले आपको वाइस चांसलर साहब ने बताया, try to read as much as you can. Then the things will be clear to you. And more clear. जितनी आप किताब पढ़ेंगे उतना अच्छा लगेगा। अभी मैं किताब पढ़ रहा, तो वो तो कल उस पर करेंगे, उस बात पर कल आएगी वो बात अच्छी है।
चलिए मैं दूसरा सवाल पूछता हूँ। ये बताइए कि you have written and you said that the motivation for this book was about Bihar election during COVID. So you have also written, and of course we have seen on TV, that as many as 18 lakh migrants had to return to Bihar, and it was a painful journey. They had to walk for several kilometers. Out of these 18 lakhs, 16 lakhs were eligible to vote. Now these people who had suffered due to government's very strict and sudden demonetization like announcement of complete lockdown, why they still voted for BJP?
how can we
In spa-
decipher each person voted for the BJP or not? Okay, every vote is a secret. These 18 lakh people, how many of them? Unfortunately, in there's one chapter very interesting. The chapter is there. In 1971 debacle of opposition party, the combined opposition, the grand alliance which was called syndicate, in which Jansan, Swatantra Party, Socialist Party, 4 parties were members. Then Minu Masani, a great writer, a freedom fighter, he wrote an article in the Statesman. He said, suppose you have 4% have the voting right. Out of 4, 2% didn't go to vote. 55% voted. And out of them, 1% voted for us and 1 for Mrs. Gandhi. We got 170 seats, Mrs. Gandhi got 370 seats. In Haryana, one election which I covered, Devi Lal party got 33% vote and got 60 seats. And Congress got 30% vote and 5 seats.
So that's a very important point. So do you think that this whole idea, because the recent election in Odisha, I have lived there, as you know, for 5 years. I have great memories of Odisha. That Naveen Patnaik's party basically got more votes than BJP, but they got half of the seats of BJP there. So do you think that, because this is a question which has been asked even by me to civil service aspirants number of times, that we should revisit the first past the poll thing, or we should have some kind of proportionate representation of first preference, second preferences kind of votes. As you must have seen yesterday, that in Sri Lanka you have a new president now, and there was 2 rounds of counting there.
You are the law student and I have mentioned that thing here. Good elections in full democracy. At the time of the drafting of the constitution, the Irish statesman A.D. Valera was in regular correspondence with Indian leaders, including Pandit Nehru and the President of the Constituent Assembly, Rajendra Prasad. He pleaded with them not to adopt the Westminster first past the post election, as that was unlikely to work in a diverse country like India, and suggested that the Irish system of multiple serial preferences may be more appropriate, though it would not be possible in this vast country. But even at that time, this point was raised. And this point is so valid. How to meet with this? How to get the people out of their houses to cast vote, and to cast vote in such a manner that the decisive manner, no fractured mandate, one after another time, the people, and the caste system is so much prevalent in the country, if one cannot deny the prevalence of the caste system, the caste dominating all these things. What have you done? So my submission is that it's first past the post election. You can't say that this person, they have voted en masse. The one election in northern India, not in the southern India, it was the 1977 election, in which the Congress was wiped out from the northern Indian states. Not a single seat from this state to that, except 2 seats. One from Rajasthan, Nathuram Mirza, and another from the Chhindwara, one Gargi Shankar Misra. The entire state, Bihar, UP, anti-Congress. Even everyone lost that election. Mrs. Gandhi lost that election by the margin of 60,000. Hats off to Indian electorate and Indian leader. Despite deficiencies of all these things, this democracy is alive only due to the Indian voter. The Indian voter is so, don't you ask anybody in the United States or anywhere, and nobody discuss election or anything. Nothing, nothing. In metro, if you want to talk to someone else, one won't talk. I had a problem from New York to Washington, 4 hours train journey. I would talk and interact with the people. Nobody talked to me. If I ask this question at what time the train goes, everything.
No, the voting percentage in US is
Voting
low.
percentage.
Their electoral college is flawed. And I was telling him in the morning that the mere fact that America has Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as candidates shows American democracy is in very bad shape. Very bad shape. Because there is no choice between these two. Both of them are bad. But Anil bhai, let me ask you a more pointed question, since we refer to this whole thing of low percentage and this and that. Should voting be made compulsory? In Gujarat, there was a law passed making voting compulsory, which could not be properly executed, because just passing a law for some kind of diversion of people from real issues, which has increasingly become the norm, may not be really good. If you say it is compulsory, so if somebody does not vote, are you going to punish that person? And if you are going to punish that person, what will be that punishment? And then, does not a right to vote includes a right not to vote? We brought in Nota because Arvind Kejriwal and others raised so much hue and cry, and it has not served any purpose at all. So don't you think that this idea of compulsory voting is also a bad idea? For those preparing for civil services, you should know at least two arguments on either side.
Yeah.
Why it is a good idea and as well as why it is a bad idea, and then have some opinion which is not absolutely against establishment. So if you think that the central government wants it, so you should tilt your opinion towards that. Whether you have that opinion or not is not a point. What you should say in the interview, I am telling. Yes, please.
That's a good and pertinent question, but I think it's not practical. How to implement and enforce it? One of the great advocates, Bhatnagar Sahib at Allahabad, told me one day that the British court generally don't pass any order against the army. Who will implement it? If it cannot be implemented, then the powers of the court is eroded. They don't want to see this position. So that's why who will implement it? The question is of implementation in such a vast country where we, unfortunately in this country, the census, 2020 census has been postponed again and again. 2020 I could understand, anyone could understand that it was COVID, but 21. And even in this year budget there is no provision for having census. I think India will be the only country in the world which will not be having census, the figures about your population and other parameters. We don't have. We are just groping in the dark. It's very unfortunate, see. But Indian voter is so intelligent, and they also showed again in this election by giving only 240 seats to the party. None could believe, even the ruling party, the Prime Minister was taken aback when they got 240 seats. Everyone was thinking that it's a permanent Modi, next time Modi. But the electorate, the illiterate electorate, very conscious, very intelligent. The election, the intelligence of the Indian electorate, one should not be challenged and one cannot be challenged. He is so intelligent and he is so well versed about the affairs. Okay, what is going on in the country, he knows each and everything. He may not share with you. Why should he share with you? My experience, opinion poll is just humbug in this country. My simple opinion is that once I asked someone, he said, Bauji, why should I tell you? He was a Muslim fellow, I gave the incentive to him कि मैं शाम को लौट के आऊँगा बड़े क्या खाएंगे. बड़े का मतलब beef, buffalo, not beef. बुफेलो भी तो
हाँ बुफेलो मीट या
हाँ तो उसे बीफ कह के तो
अब अंग्रेजी में एक ही वर्ड है
तो अंग्रेजी तो एक है लेकिन उसको तो उसने कहा बाबूजी आप हो तो बहुत होशियार लेकिन मैं आपको बतलाने का नहीं मैं वोट किधर दूंगा और ये आज की बात नहीं है इट वाज इन 1980 person is very intelligent, and we should, and that's why our democracy, despite all the shortcomings or the miscomings, thrive and will continue to thrive. I have faith, complete faith in the democracy.
Very good. My next question, Maheshwari ji, is you have written that TN Session, about whom you don't have a good opinion, had said that they conduct election as per